Hey, boys and girls, it's Miss Mac and Frank. He's here too. We are going to read you chapter 20 of Frankenstein, and I'm going to do this the same way I did it before, where I have the Actively Learn pulled up, and we'll go through it there. Now, you may be wondering, the last video is chapter 18, so where's 19? We did skip chapter 19. Right here, you'll see in the Actively Learn, I have a little summary of chapter 19. Here's the basic rundown. So Henry and Victor, they get to England and then they go to Scotland, and Henry loves it there. As you guys have learned about Henry, he's a very positive person. He likes to travel and see new things, and he really loves Scotland. Victor is like, I need to make this female monster. I'm depressed. So they split up. And Victor separates and tries to find a place to begin his creation. He finds a little kind of like abandoned house in a village and decides to make the creation there. I did decide to skip that chapter just because it's a lot of them traveling and talking about the scenery again, and I thought it was worthwhile for us to just move on. So as we do chapter 20 today, I just want you to answer the questions, read any notes that I've put in, and if you need to highlight, define, and take notes, remember that's what this tool is good for. You can annotate right on your copy, and it just will be for you. So, and I can see it too, but if you need to take notes, if you need to define words, if you need to highlight anything, please do so. It's your text to read and mark up. So we're going to start with the before you read question. And this is just a poll, okay? So before you read chapter 20, make a prediction. Do you think that Victor will successfully complete the monster's request? Will he create a female monster? So go ahead and choose yes or no and let me know what you think. If you want to, right at the beginning, you can leave a little comment on why. So if you wanted to highlight like Frankenstein, you could insert a note and tell me why you chose your answer to the poll there. I won't click off of it. Okay. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and read through chapter 20 of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Frank, you ready? He's going to sleep. Don't you guys go to sleep. You listen. He can go to sleep. He's a puppy. Okay, so we are going to read chapter 20 of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, starting here. I sat one evening in my laboratory. The sun had set and the moon was just rising from the sea. I had not sufficient light for my employment, and I remained idle in a pause of consideration of whether I should leave my labor for the night or hasten its conclusion by an unremitting attention to it. As I sat, a train of reflection occurred to me, which led me to consider the effects of what I was now doing. 3 years before I was engaged in the same manner and had created a fiend whose unparalleled barbarity had desolated my heart and filled it forever with the bitterest remorse. I was now about to form another being, of whose dispositions I was alike ignorant. She might become 10,000 times more malignant than her mate, and delight for its own sake in murder and wretchedness. He had sworn to quit the neighborhood of man and hide himself in deserts, but she had not, and she, who in all probability was to become a thinking and reasoning animal, might refuse to comply with a compact made before her creation. They might even hate each other. The creature who already lived loathed his own deformity, and might he not conceive a greater abhorrence for it when it came before his eyes in the female form? She also might turn with disgust from him to the superior beauty of man. She might quit him, and he be alone again, exasperated by the fresh provocation of being deserted by one of his own species. Even if they were to leave Europe and inhabit the deserts of the New World, yet one of the first results of those sympathies for which the demon thirsted would be children, and a race of devils would be propagated upon the earth who might make the very existence of the species of man a condition precarious and full of terror. Had I right, for my own benefit, to inflict this curse upon everlasting generations? I had before been moved by the sophisms of the being I had created. I had been struck senseless by his fiendish threats, But now, for the first time, the wickedness of my promise burst upon me. I shuddered to think that the future ages might curse me as their pest, whose selfishness had not hesitated to buy its own peace at the price, perhaps, of the existence of the whole human race. I trembled, and my heart failed within me, when, on looking up, I saw by the light of the moon the demon at the casement. A ghastly grin wrinkled his lips as he gazed on me, where I sat fulfilling the task which he had allotted to me. Yes, he had followed me in my travels. He had loitered in forests, hid himself in caves, or taken refuge in wide and desert heaths. And he now came to mark my progress and claim the fulfillment of my promise. As I looked on him, his countenance expressed the utmost extent of malice and treachery. I thought with a sensation of madness on my promise of creating another like to him, and trembling with passion, tore to pieces the thing on which I was engaged. The wretch saw me destroy the creature on whose future existence he depended for happiness, and with a howl of devilish despair and revenge, withdrew. I left the room and, locking the door, made a solemn vow in my own heart never to resume my labors. And then, with trembling steps, I sought my own apartment. I was alone. None were near me to dissipate the gloom and relieve me from the sickening oppression of the most terrible reveries. Several hours passed, and I remained near my window gazing on the sea. It was almost motionless, for the winds were hushed, and all nature reposed under the eye of the quiet moon. A few fishing vessels alone specked the water, and now and then the gentle breeze wafted the sound of voices as the fishermen called to one another. I felt the silence, although I was hardly conscious of its extreme profundity, until my ear was suddenly arrested by the paddling of oars near the shore, and a person landed close to my house. In a few minutes after, I heard the creaking of my door as if someone endeavored to open it softly. I trembled from head to foot. I felt a presentiment of who it was, and wished to rouse one of the peasants who dwelt in a cottage not far from mine. But I was overcome by the sensation of helplessness, so often felt in frightful dreams, when you in vain endeavor to fly from an impending danger, and was rooted to the spot. Presently, I heard the sound of footsteps along the passage. The door opened, and the wretch whom I dreaded appeared. Shutting the door, he approached me and said in a smothered voice, "You have destroyed the work which you began. What is it that you intend? Do you dare to break your promise?" "I have endured toil and misery. I left Switzerland with you. I crept along the shores of the Rhine, along its willow islands, and over the summits of the hills. I have dwelt many months in the heaths of England and among the deserts of Scotland. I have endured incalculable fatigue and cold and hunger. Do you dare destroy my hopes? Begone! I do break my promise. Never will I create another like yourself, equal in deformity and wickedness. Slave, I before reasoned with you, but you have proved yourself unworthy of my condescension. Remember that I have power. You believe yourself miserable, but I can make you so wretched that the light of day will be hateful to you. You are my creator, but I am your master. Obey. The hour of my irresolution is past, and the period of your power is arrived. Your threats cannot move me to do an act of wickedness, but they confirm me in a determination of not creating you a companion in vice. Shall I, in cool blood, set loose upon the earth a demon whose delight is in death and wretchedness? Begone, I am firm, and your words will only exasperate my rage." The monster saw my determination in my face, and gnashed his teeth in the impotence of anger. "Shall each man," cried he, "find a wife for his bosom, and each beast have his mate, and I be alone? I had feelings of affection, and they were requited by detestation and scorn. Man, you may hate, but beware. Your hours will pass in dread and misery, and soon the bolt will fall which must ravish from you your happiness forever. Are you to be happy while I grovel in the intensity of my wretchedness? You can blast my other passions, but revenge remains, revenge, henceforth dearer than light or food. I may die, but first you, my tyrant and tormentor, shall curse the sun that gazes on your misery. Beware, for I am fearless and therefore powerful. I will watch with the wiliness of a snake, that I may sting with its venom. Man, you shall repent of the injuries you inflict. Devil, cease and do not poison the air with these sounds of malice. I have declared my resolution to you, and I am no coward to bend beneath words. Leave me, I am inexorable. It is well, I go. But remember, I shall be with you on your wedding night. I started forward and exclaimed, Villain, before you sign my death warrant, be sure that you are yourself safe. I would have seized him, but he eluded me and quitted the house with precipitation. In a few moments I saw him in his boat, which shot across the waters with an airy swiftness and was soon lost amidst the waves. All was again silent, but his words rung in my ears. I burned with rage to pursue the murderer of my peace and precipitate him into the ocean. I walked up and down my room hastily and perturbed, while my imagination conjured up 1,000 images to torment and sting me. Why had I not followed him and closed with him in mortal strife? But I had suffered him to depart, and he had directed his course towards the mainland. I shuddered to think who might be the next victim sacrificed to his insatiate revenge. And then I thought again of his words, I will be with you on your wedding night. That then was the period fixed for the fulfillment of my destiny. In that hour I should die, and at once satisfy and extinguish his malice. The prospect did not move me to fear, yet when I thought of my beloved Elizabeth, of her tears and endless sorrow, when she should find her lover so barbarously snatched from her, tears, the first I had shed for many months, streamed from my eyes, and I resolved not to fall before my enemy without a bitter struggle. The night passed away, and the sun rose from the ocean. My feelings became calmer, if it may be called calmness, when the violence of rage sinks into the depths of despair. I left the house, the horrid scene of the last night's contention, and walked on the beach of the sea, which I almost regarded as an insuperable barrier between me and my fellow creatures. Nay, a wish that such should prove the fact stole across me. I desired that I might pass my life on that barren rock, wearily, it is true, but uninterrupted by any sudden shock of misery. If I returned, it was to be sacrificed, or to see those whom I most loved die under the grasp of a demon whom I myself had created. I walked about the isle like a restless specter, separated from all it loved and miserable in the separation. When it became noon and the sun rose higher, I lay down on the grass and was overpowered by a deep sleep. I had been awake the whole of the preceding night, and my nerves were agitated and my eyes inflamed by watching and misery. The sleep into which I now sunk refreshed me, and when I awoke, I again felt as if I belonged to a race of human beings like myself, and I began to reflect upon what had passed with greater composure. Yet still the words of the fiend rung in my ears like a death knell. They appeared like a dream, yet distinct and oppressive as a reality. The sun had far descended, and I still sat on the shore, satisfying my appetite, which had become ravenous, with an oaten cake, when I saw the fishing boat land close to me, and one of the men brought me a packet. It contained letters from Geneva and one from Clairvaux, entreating me to join him. He said that he was wearing away his time fruitlessly where he was, that letters from the friends he had formed in London desired his return to complete the negotiation they had entered into for his Indian enterprise. He could not any longer delay his departure, but as his journey to London might be followed even sooner than he now conjectured by his longer voyage, he entreated me to bestow as much of my society on him as I could spare. He besought me, therefore, to leave my solitary isle and to meet him at Perth, that we might proceed southwards together. This letter and a degree called me to life, and I determined to quit my island at the expiration of 2 days. Yet before I departed, there was a task to perform, which I shuddered to reflect. I must pack up my chemical instruments, and for that purpose I must enter the room in which which had been the scene of my most odious work, which I must handle, and I must handle those utensils, the sight of which was sickening to me. The next morning at daybreak, I summoned sufficient courage and unlocked the door of my laboratory. The remains of the half-finished creature, whom I had destroyed, lay scattered on the floor, and I almost felt as if I had mangled the living flesh of a human being. I paused to collect myself, and then entered the chamber. With trembling hand, I conveyed the instruments out of the room, but I reflected that I ought not to leave the relics of my work to excite the horror and suspicion of the peasants, and I accordingly put them into a basket with a great quantity of stones, and, laying them up, determined to throw them into the sea that very night. And in the meantime, I sat upon the beach, employed in cleaning and arranging my chemical apparatus. Nothing could be more complete than the alteration that had taken place in my feelings since the night of the appearance of the demon. I had before regarded my purpose with a gloomy despair as a thing that, with whatever consequences, must be fulfilled, but I now felt as if a film had been taken from before my eyes, and that I, for the first time, saw clearly. The idea of renewing my labors did not for one instant occur to me. The threat I had heard weighed on my thoughts, but I did not reflect that a voluntary act of mine could avert it. I had resolved in my own mind that to create another like the fiend I had first made would be an act of the basest and most atrocious selfishness, and I banished from my mind every thought that could lead to a different conclusion. Between 2 and 3 in the morning, the moon rose, and I then, putting my basket aboard a little skiff, sailed out about 4 miles from the shore. The scene was perfectly solitary. A few boats were returning towards land, but I sailed away from them. I felt as if I was about the commission of a dreadful crime, and avoided with shuddering anxiety any encounter with my fellow creatures. At one time the moon, which had before been clear, was suddenly overspread by a thick cloud, and I took advantage of the moment of darkness and cast my basket into the sea. I listened to the gurgling sound as it sunk, and then sailed away from the spot. The sky became clouded, but the air was pure, although chilled by the northeast breeze that was then rising. But it refreshed me, and filled me with such agreeable sensations that I resolved to prolong my stay on the water, and, fixing the rudder in a direct position, stretched myself at the bottom of the boat. Clouds hid the moon, everything was obscure, and I heard only the sound of the boat. I heard only the sound of the boat as its keel cut through the waves. The murmur lulled me, and in a short time I slept soundly. I do not know how long I remained in this situation, but when I awoke I found that the sun had already mounted considerably. The wind was high, and the waves continually threatened the safety of my little skiff. I found that the wind was northeast, which must have driven me far from the coast which I had embarked. I endeavored to change my course, but quickly found that if I again made the attempt, the boat would be instantly filled with water. Thus situated, my only resource was to drive before the wind. I confess that I felt a few sensations of terror. I had no compass with me, and was so slenderly acquainted with the geography of this part of the world that the sun was of little benefit to me. I might be driven into the wide Atlantic and feel all the tortures of starvation, or be swallowed up in the immeasurable waters that roared and buffeted around me. I had already been out many hours, and felt the torment of a burning thirst, a prelude to my other sufferings. I looked on the heavens, which were covered by clouds that flew before the wind, only to be replaced by others. I looked upon the sea. It was to be my grave. "Fiend," I exclaimed, "your task is already fulfilled." I thought of Elizabeth, of my father, and of Clairval, all left behind, on whom the monster might satisfy his sanguinary and merciless passions. This idea plunged me into a reverie, so despairing and frightful that even now, when the scene is on the point of closing before me forever, I shudder to reflect on it. Some hours passed thus, but by degrees, as the sun declined towards the horizon, the wind died away into a gentle breeze, and the sea became free from breakers. But these gave place to a heavy swell. I felt sick and hardly able to hold the rudder, when suddenly I saw a line of high land towards the south. Almost spent as I was by fatigue and the dreadful suspense I endured for several hours, this sudden certainty of life rushed like a flood of warm joy to my heart, and tears gushed from my eyes. How mutable are our feelings, and how strange is that clinging love we have of life, even in the excess of misery. I constructed another sail with a part of my dress, and eagerly steered my course toward the land. It had a wild and rocky appearance, but as I approached nearer, I easily perceived the traces of cultivation. I saw vessels near the shore, and found myself suddenly transported back to the neighborhood of civilized man. I carefully traced the windings of the land, and held a steeple which I at length saw issuing from behind a small promontory. As I was in a state of extreme debility, I resolved to sail directly towards the town as a place where I could most easily procure nourishment. Fortunately, I had money with me. As I turned the promontory, I perceived a small, neat town and a good harbor, which I entered, my heart bounding with joy at my unexpected escape. As I was occupied in fixing the boat and arranging the sails, several people crowded towards the spot. They seemed much surprised at my appearance, but instead of offering me any assistance, whispered together with gestures that at any other time might have produced in me a slight sensation of alarm. As it was, I merely remarked that they spoke English, and I therefore addressed them in that language. "My good friends," said I, "will you be so kind as to tell me the name of this town, and inform me where I am?" "You will know that soon enough," replied a man with a hoarse voice. "Maybe you are come to a place that will not prove much to your taste, but you will not be consulted as to your quarters, I promise you." I was exceedingly surprised on receiving so rude an answer from a stranger, and I was also disconcerted on perceiving the frowning and angry countenances of his companions. "Why do you answer me so roughly?" I replied. "Surely it is not the custom of Englishmen to receive strangers so inhospitably." "I do not know," said the man, "what the custom of the English may be, but it is the custom of the Irish to hate villains." While this strange dialogue continued, I perceived the crowd rapidly increase. Their faces expressed a mixture of curiosity and anger, which annoyed and in some degree alarmed me. I inquired the way to the inn, but no one replied. I then moved forward, and a murmuring sound arose from the crowd as they followed and surrounded me, when an ill-looking man approaching tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Come, sir, you must follow me to Mr. Kerwin's to give an account of yourself." "Who is Mr. Kerwin? Why am I to give an account of myself? Is this not a free country?" "Aye, sir, free enough for honest folks. Mr. Kerwin is a magistrate, and you are to give an account of the death of a gentleman who was found murdered here last night." The answer startled me, but I presently recovered myself. I was innocent. That could easily be proved. Accordingly, I followed my conductor in silence, and was led to one of the best houses in the town. I was ready to sink from fatigue and hunger, but being surrounded by a crowd, I thought it politic to rouse all my strength, that no physical debility might be construed into apprehension or conscious guilt. Little did I then expect the calamity that was in a few moments to overwhelm me and extinguish in horror and despair all fear of ignominy or death. I must pause here, for it requires all my fortitude to recall the memory of the frightful events which I am about to relate in proper detail to my recollection. The end of chapter 20. So a lot happens in chapter 20. I think sometimes one of the things that can be hard about these classic novels is they kind of go back and forth. In a modern novel, like in The Hunger Games or Harry Potter or The Hate You Give, it's normal to have a very consistent pace. Like the story gets more and more and more and more intense until the climax and then it drops off. But in classic literature like this, that wasn't really the style. So you'll see a lot of things like this where it goes from chapter 19 where literally nothing happens the whole chapter pretty much to chapter 20 where it's like bang 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 events are happening. The pacing, like the speed of the action, is not as um, straightforward, right? In a modern novel, we kind of like are used to watching movies, so they tend to try to structure the novel like a movie. But back in the day, this was way before movies, so this is how they wrote, right? There would be times where characters spend a lot of time in reflection, nothing really happens, and then there's times when the pace really picks up, and that's kind of normal for classic literature, and that's one of the things that keeps people like separate from it is they don't really understand the pacing. So they think, I don't like this, it's slow. But a lot of times, if you just keep moving, it gets there. They just go about it kind of like a roundabout way. So, anyway, that's my little digression. But essentially, chapter 20, Victor decides, I'm not making this monster. This man's bad. I'm not doing this to the world, making another one. And he realizes, hey, I didn't think this through. What if she doesn't want to be with him? What if she becomes alive and I say, hey, you got to live with this guy on your own for the rest of time? And she says, that guy, he's ugly. So he didn't think that through. And so he decides, I can't risk it. I can't risk making this monster. And in like a fit of rage, he destroys what he had started on the female monster. So we're assuming there was some sort of body that he had put together. He completely rips it apart, and the monster has been watching him, so he sees this. And the monster is like, oh no, you have done it now. And the monster gives him this threat, I'm going to be there on your wedding night, sir. And so Victor's feeling this like, oh no, this dread, what's going to happen? My fate's been fulfilled. I'm going to die on my wedding night. But he does not change his mind. He's like, basically comes to the idea that like either he's going to die or everyone he knows is going to die, or even worse, he could unleash like a whole race of violent monsters onto the human population. So he decides, worst case scenario is I cause the end of the world. So let me stop that. So Victor decides, I'm not making the monster a female companion. The monster says, bye. I'm leaving. I'll see you on your wedding night. We're assuming he's going to kill Victor on his wedding night. Victor is just kind of like dealing with this, cleaning up, whatever. And he gets a letter from Clairval that says like, hey, my little trip is winding down. I want you to come meet up with me again. And Victor says, you know what? Let me do it. So he tosses all of his tools into the ocean and goes off to meet Clairval. Now, here's where it gets a little hairy. Okay. He pulls up to this town, random town, doesn't know what it is. Remember, he's not from here. He pulls up to this town, he's ragged, he's hungry, he's been on a horrible journey, and he's like, hey, like, show me the hotel, motel, Holiday Inn. And they're like, no, you're going straight to the judge. He's like, why? Someone was murdered here last night and you've got to answer for it. So that's what he's got to do. So Victor's being taken before the judge to discuss a murder that happened in the town last night. And all we know at this point is at the end of the chapter, Victor basically says, like, give me a second to compose myself before I tell you the next part of this story. So we're assuming that when we get to what happens in front of the judge, it's going to be really bad. Okay. So again, we've picked up the pacing here. Mary Shelley's dropping us a lot of events. The monster comes, they get in a fight. There's a threat about the wedding night. He's going on the journey in the storm. Then he arrives at this town and they want to charge him with murder, right? So it's picking up, picking up, picking up, picking up. And that's our clue that like all of these little pieces she's been stringing together from the beginning are starting to wind up into a big, nasty trouble for Victor. Okay. make sure you're answering the questions as you go through to the best of your ability. I know sometimes this can be super tricky because it gets your mind into that thing where you have to reread the sentence like 6 times, and it can be really discouraging. But I wouldn't have given you this text if I didn't think you could get something from it, right? And what I want you to be seeing is that it doesn't matter how difficult the text is. I could have given you the hardest text that anyone's ever written, right? But if you read it and get help and advice and reread it and define words, you can read and understand anything, okay? So just keep going. Those of you who have been really on top of the book, you are growing your skills so much you don't even know it. You may think, how is this helping me? I don't even understand this book. But by you taking each sentence, each question, and trying to answer it, you are proving to yourself that you can read anything, right? And as we get into these last couple of chapters, all of these kind of emotional pieces that have kind of felt like they've been kind of spread apart, Mary Shelley's going to tie them all together really nicely for us. So I hope you enjoyed chapter 20. And if you're watching this on Friday, I hope you have a great weekend. If you're watching it on a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday or Thursday, have a great next day. I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.